If you've been in the AIM community, you've probably heard of the Bardoz Method. It's seen as the standard for static. So then why does everyone aim so differently? Even with all the differences, they're all based on the same fundamentals. The Bardoz Method is pretty well known, so I'm just gonna give a quick overview. It's built around three parts: the initial flick, the micro correction, and visual confirmation. For the initial flick, we don't want to rely on just the arm. You should be using your arm and your wrist together. Start the motion with your arm, then let your forearm and wrist guide the flick into the target. When it comes to the micro, we also don't want to isolate the wrist. Keeping your arm involved makes the transition into the micro smoother and more controlled. It's helpful to consider these movements in terms of how much tension or muscle activation we're using. Higher tension creates faster movements, so it's important to use a lot of it for your initial flicks. But high tension also creates instability, meaning we have to release it as we approach the target and only a small amount for our micro corrections. This is something that a lot of people struggle with, and for training tension management, I recommend the TSK Benchmarks. The smoothness scenarios will develop an understanding of tension, and the static benches are also great as well for practicing specific linear movements that feel uncomfortable. Now, on to the most important fundamental: fluidity. Fluidity is your ability to chain targets together specifically by minimizing the pause on each dot. So how do we actually reduce the time spent on targets? You might think it's by flicking faster, but it's actually the opposite. Pushing your flick speed initiates the start of the micro and visual confirmation faster, so you need to speed both of these up as well. This is the main reason why people struggle to push speed in the right way. Take a look at this clip. The flicks are faster, but the visual confirmations are slower. Now, let's take a look at this one. The flicks are slower, but the overall pace is faster. Slowing our flick down can actually make the micro and confirmation faster to process. The biggest step you can take to improve is by cluster farming. For dots close to each other, we should be grouping them to do what's basically a double click or even triple click. When performing this, it should be instinctual without having to put as much conscious effort into each flick. Reducing tension and slowing down is essential here, as it makes these smaller adjustments way easier. Another key part of fluidity is how visual confirmation changes as you improve at static. The visual confirmation starts happening during or even before the micro correction, tying back to how cluster farming is instinctual. A good principle to learn is to anticipate the click instead of reacting after you land. You should be aware of how long a flick takes based on the distances, so that you're more prepared after landing. Speed scenarios are the best way to learn fluidity, and I put together a playlist that will help with cluster technique. For pathing, you should be going for the closest dot and planning ahead. However, it's important to also have awareness of surrounding spawns, so that you aren't caught off guard. Pacing should not be constant, and as mentioned before, cluster farming is what gives the dynamic pacing. When pushing speed, try to focus more on moving to the next dot rather than your actual initial flick speed. Now that we've covered the fundamentals, we can talk about playstyles. Fundamentals are important, but they shouldn't restrict you. As you progress, you'll start adapting them naturally to your needs. There isn't a single correct style, as each player applies these concepts differently. We can take Europe for example, who executes the ideal Bardoz technique, or Minigod, who's able to cluster farm efficiently. There are trade-offs to the way everyone plays, but the best way you can play is by taking different aspects of others and applying it to your own technique. This is how I've changed my approach. Instead of thinking about static as two completely separate movements, I think of it as one motion with a threshold point, basically the moment where I start to slow down. When I'm flicking, I'm not mentally separating the initial flick and the micro. Physically, they're still both happening, but mentally I'm combining them into one continuous movement, as shown. I still use the initial explosiveness for speed, but I slow down a bit earlier, allowing me to flick only as much as needed. That gives me way more awareness of where I'm actually landing and makes it easier to clean up any jagged lines during the flick. Another important part of this is the micro. On the initial flick, we want to move straight to the dot. We don't want to spread or a landing zone around the target, just a direct line. If you land in a general area instead of lining up with the dot, you're forced to add another directional change in the micro, making it harder. But if you land already lined up to the target, that's one less step you need to fix during the micro correction. At the end of the day, everyone has their own style when it comes to static, and you should always start with the core fundamentals. But at the same time, don't be afraid to experiment and find what actually works best for you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed my first educational post. I plan on making an additional video to this that's more in depth and might also open coaching, so stay tuned.